I play first violin in the Chiara String Quartet, and I've been in a professional string quartet for 14 years. Our quartet's been around that long. We currently teach at the University of Nebraska, Lincoln, and we're at Madeline Island this week working with students, and we travel around the world and the country playing concerts and teaching and just enjoying making music together. So
I heard you telling the students in there about, you were talking about Beethoven, and you were telling them to make the music less beautiful.
Yeah.
So for somebody who, like me, who is a layman who loves classical music, doesn't understand structure, can't read music, but plays a stereo.
Sure.
Talk to me about that.
Well, Beethoven was an extraordinary musician and a performer himself, and he was very interested in contrast between, beauty and ugliness and darkness and light, and his music, his markings reflect all of this. And so sometimes, I like to think of this analogy of sort of it being sunny all the time, and then when you have a cloud that comes and passes through your vision, of course you experience it viscerally, emotionally, right? But when the sun comes out again, you're that much more joyous than if you just were in sun constantly. And so Beethoven is kind of a master at putting these stark, sort of contrasting, just characters, musically speaking, next to each other, and so they create these powerful foils for one another. So it's our job as musicians to effectively portray these contrasts. I mean, it sounds simple, but it's actually incredibly difficult not to play beautifully all the time. Because we see music and it's lyrical and we love vibrating, string players, we love singing it's in this beautiful way. But actually sometimes that's really not what the music needs in order for the performance to be effective. And so teaching students that is often kind of eye-opening because they're taught to play well all the time. And it's not that we're asking them to play well, we're asking them to play with color and with extremity and actually try to get closer with their instruments to the human experience, because that's really what a musical performance should be. It should touch us in this very deep place. And the contrast that we make, life is not all beautiful and fun. And composers, certainly, especially someone as masterful as Beethoven, wouldn't have ever written that sort of flat beauty into his music because it wouldn't have mattered that much.
So, there was almost kind of an inference that sometimes these composers are having fun with us or having fun with musicians.
Right. Well, I mean, Beethoven was famous for saying, you're complaining about your instruments and playing them, and I don't care about your instruments. Like, this is the music I'm going to write. And it's kind of funny considering that, some of his music is really very difficult to play. But, we're sitting here talking to the students about, it sounds so easy. It sounds so easy. Make it more difficult. But actually what we're doing is trying to get the technical aspects of playing, for certain people are quite easy, but then they have to work to make it emotionally complex, and which is what Beethoven was going for. And then some students have trouble playing it easily technically, and we're trying to tell them how to have more ease, with their technique. So it's a kind of interesting juxtaposition sometimes when, as instructors, how to work with students best to get their best moments. But actually you asked about Beethoven messing with us, with musicians or playing tricks on us. He certainly does that, but I think it's more intentionally he plays tricks in the music for the audience. And as performers, it's our job to recognize what those are, or if something is not expected, that catches us off guard. And if we, the musicians, don't recognize it, then how is the audience going to recognize it? Which was, what Beethoven wanted. So,
how explicit are the instructions of a composer to musician? I'm thinking of like Mahler's Fifth Symphony, the third movement.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's played for 8 minutes, and sometimes it's played for 13 minutes.
Right. That's a good example.
Yeah. So what are the instructions you get?
I mean, sometimes, you're talking about the amount of time that it takes for a piece to be played. It's that kind of thing is subjective. I mean, composers did write metronome markings, giving you a sense of what they want. Beethoven wrote a lot of metronome markings, for example, but some people think his metronome was broken because some of them are ridiculously fast, and some of them are just, surprising in any case. And, so that's one aspect to think about. What did the composer really intend metronome-wise? But actually, with someone like Beethoven, it's more important to kind of probe, like I was saying, getting close to the human experience, because Beethoven was a flawed human being like the rest of us, and he was particularly good at portraying all the extremes of emotion in his music. So, for example, it's up to the performers to, internalize the music and then try to communicate it out. So, a movement like the slow movement Opus 132 string quartet, which is the Heilige Dankgesang, which is one of the most extraordinary pieces of music ever written, I think. I've heard performances there. It's a very long, slow movement and very incredibly contemplative and transcendent. It really transcends everything. Hard to put that into words. But, I've heard performances that are like 17 minutes long, and I've heard some that are 21. Or, the point is you have to, like I said, reach inside of yourself and experience what that music means to you. And if it's really, if it is authentic, then you are, you try to make it authentic, really speaking from you. And that can take all different forms. Yeah.
Sometimes like my impression is like Tchaikovsky's Piano Concerto No. 2 is kind of difficult for a pianist.
Uh-huh.
Is there a sadistic streak in some of these composers?
Well, there are some composers who were performers. Paganini is legendary as a violinist. Since I'm a violinist, I can talk about that pretty well, and had famously long fingers and was able to do these kind of unbelievable circus tricks on the violin that, they have now become standard pieces in the repertory. And they're incredibly difficult, especially with people who have hands that are, half the size of mine. And so there are these expectations, this music is part of the repertoire. And this, I think that composer performers were often quite brilliant and quite unusual and would give themselves challenges to take on. So Mozart, for example, was a violist and violinist, and he often sat in the viola chair when he was reading string quartets or, his own viola quintets and that kind of thing. And so, you'll often find these little sort of funny little hidden moments or little, I wouldn't say jokes, but just little sort of nuggets that only really Mozart would have put in because, he would have played that part. Or he would have put in a little fun thing for his friend Haydn to play. So there are certainly, I wouldn't say Mozart was sadistic in that kind of way, but people do think, performer composers like Liszt and Beethoven and Paganini and people like that had a lot going on that maybe they could play or that they could almost play or that they could only play and wanted to keep it that way. You just never know.
This is a question that's a little bit out of left field, but important, I think, and that is, in this dog-eat-dog world, the humanities, art, and music, it seems to me, are more important than ever. Do you have any thoughts about that?
Well, I'm a musician by profession. I come from a long line of musicians and lovers of the arts. I'm married to a visual artist. My kids are heavily involved in the arts, and so it's not just part of my life, it is my life. It's how I view life. It's how it's a language that I interact with all the time. So for me to think of it as separate from life, it's really hard to do that. I think, I feel like my job as a musician, as an artist, is to make the arts more a part of life.
How long have you been affiliated with Madeline Island?
Sure, yeah. Well, actually, this is our first summer coming out. My quartet is usually together during the summer, so we have several sort of permanent or ongoing teaching gigs, as it were, as a quartet. And this is the first year coming here for a week, so we're loving it. Yeah.
Quite a place, the island.
It's gorgeous.
Yeah.
It's really nice.
There's got to be a lot of schools for aspiring musicians.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think is special about Madeline Island Music Camp?
Well, first of all, it's one of the only places in the country where you can study exclusively chamber music. I guess there are a handful of places, but it is special in that way. It's one of those handful. And it's really in a wonderful kind of intensive training environment for young chamber music players. And all the string quartets are put together before the students come, and they stay together the whole summer. Sometimes at other festivals, you'll be in a group that will be together for 1 week or 2 weeks, and then you move into another configuration with other students. But in this sense, students are able to really, really get to know each other really well. The ensemble becomes tighter. They're able to really delve deeply into pieces of music with people they didn't know previously, but now, it becomes almost like a full-time relationship suddenly. And so that's a really unique experience for students, and it's very intensive. And I think it's really I think chamber music is really the truest way to get to the heart of music and get to the heart of things. It's really a very loving and collaborative process.
A couple of the instructors up here have made comments about how the musicians put their best efforts into the quartet. Could you comment on that?
Sure. Into the string quartet?
Yeah.
Yeah. You mean composers?
Composers, that's right.
Yeah. Well, composers, Joseph Haydn was the first real composer of the string quartet, and he's the first one who said, I think if I put, I've been working with this group before, and I think if I put 2 violins, a viola, and a cello together, that's really going to get a great sound. And he wrote, a lot of string quartets, over 80 string quartets, and he set this incredible standard. And the Haydn string quartets, are some of the most extraordinary pieces of music written. And then Mozart, followed and dedicated these quartets to Haydn. It was like this, sort of stacking effect where all the greatest composers kind of said, oh, this is this art. This is this very special and intimate group that can do all these wonderful things. They can together they sound like a human voice, and separately they sound like 4 unique voices. And so composers, still this modern day, it's a big deal for a young composer to write a string quartet, and sometimes they're quaking in their boots, as it were, trying to live up to these great masterworks. And Brahms, for example, felt so intimidated living the shadow of Beethoven that he threw away 20 drafts of string quartets, like 20, before he came up with his first string quartet. We just recorded the string quartets of Brahms, so that's why I'm particularly familiar with Brahms right now. And then he only wrote 3. And so it's become this this very special and intimate and absolutely just the most highly regarded art form, really, to play string quartets. And a friend of ours, a younger composer named Jefferson Friedman, said that his string quartets, which he wrote for us, are like diary entries. There's something about the sounds that combine that make it possible to really express, the fullness of your soul. It's hard to put it into words, but and that's why there's so much great music for the string quartet, which is why, groups like us can have a lifetime, a life career playing this music and only get through, a fourth of the repertoire in 50 years,
Last thought, of course I always have other thoughts, but I've been interested in the personal dynamics of quartets. On one hand, you've got these really talented individual artists.
Right.
But they kind of have to sublimate their egos when they play together. And yet, and you're together so much, and you have this one. It's like having something you really all love. It must create a certain type of bonding that might not occur in a corporate environment, for example.
Oh, yes. I probably would. Although I've never been in a corporate environment, I can't relate personally. However, playing in a string quartet is. Somebody said it's like being in a marriage with all the problems and none of the benefits. But actually, it really is an incredibly close bond, because especially if you're a group that's traveling, because you're on the road and you're eating together, you're working together, you're experiencing all of life together in a lot of ways, and it really becomes like a family. In our quartet, 2 members are married. And so you see that in many groups where there are relationships in groups that are really lifelong relationships. In our quartet, two of us grew up together. And then another one of us, 2 of us have been playing together since we were in high school. So there are really these long-term connections and commitments to one another that make it possible for a quartet to continue, because you go through incredible stress. Not just performance, but just making the life of the quartet work. It's a small business too, and so you have to work out your particular dynamic based on your personalities, and each quartet is entirely different. You throw a new person in there, and it's all different. Fortunately for us, we've been together, since the beginning, the 4 of us, and so we're really growing together, which is a really beautiful thing, but it takes a lot of work, and sometimes, we don't love each other. Or sometimes we really need a break. And so that's, I think, I always say I could be a relationship counselor in a heartbeat, because also, everything from the way you talk to one another, because when you're playing music, it really is getting into the most vulnerable parts of who you are. And that's maybe in, a way in which it differs from the corporate environment. Because when you're playing music, you're trying to get at the core of something, and so any little comment that's made that threatens that, you have to work with it. So, but it's a wonderful thing. Those are some of the things that inevitably happen when you're doing something very special and very intimate like that. So.
Thank you. Is there anything that I didn't ask that I should have?
You asked a lot of really good questions. I can't really think.
I don't know. Something you'd like to say that I didn't?
I don't know. I think I said a lot.
You did. You did very well. I made a wise choice in asking you.
Oh. Yeah, actually, I really liked what Greg said about you being, because I think the 4 of you have a really special conception of this piece already. And it really is a beautiful piece. It's interesting to play this and to try to figure out how to start the tempo, the story that you're telling. What are you thinking about at the opening?
I have a pastoral theme.
In mind.
It's a beautiful day.
A beautiful
You're in love, maybe.
Being in love is a good thing. Hopefully it's a good thing, right? Sometimes.
Not always enough.
But it's interesting, because I found this opening very hard to start, because I look at it and it says adagio, right? Ma non troppo, and then I see these 16th notes with dots, slur and dots, right? And how do I make sense of that? And then I look at when this melody returns, and it's got all these wonderful sort of flourishes and things going on the other side, and it feels, for me, much more comfortable to start there. That kind of thing. The variation seems to me, and I always feel, and I felt this from you guys, it felt more comfortable to play, right? I don't know if you felt that. Maybe it's that there's more motion and more inevitability in that moment. And so I was wondering if at the beginning, because the story you're telling is beautiful and it's actually quite clear, if there can, but it's all, when it comes back, there's a lightness about it. You're not going to lose the adagio. And I wonder if you could start the opening. This is the trick that I do, but I actually think ahead. I actually think about what it sounds like. later on in the piece. And I also noticed you were sort of using your bow differently too, and kind of releasing the sound a little bit more. And I was wondering if you could try the opening. Thinking about, I guess that would be you have to find, can you help me out with this? Where the return is. 45. Yes, thank you. 45. Okay. So why don't we play 45 quickly?
Oops. Oh, sorry. That's where we feel a little nice.
Let's get, it's interesting because I've found this opening very hard to start because I look at it and it says adagio, right? Non troppo, and then I see these 16th notes with dots, slur and dots, right? And how do I make sense of that? And then I look at when this melody returns, and it's got all these wonderful sort of flourishes and things going on the other side, and it feels for me much more comfortable to start there. That kind of thing. The variation seems to me, and I always feel, and I felt this from you guys, it felt more comfortable to play, right? I don't know if you felt that. Maybe it's that there's more motion and more inevitability in that line. And so I was wondering if at the beginning, because the story you're telling is beautiful, and it's actually quite clear, if there can, it's all, when it comes back, there's a lightness about it. You're not going to lose the adagio. And I'm wondering if you could start the opening. This is the trick that I do, but I actually think ahead. I actually think about what it sounds like later on in the piece. And I also noticed you were sort of using your bow differently too, and kind of releasing the sound a little bit more. And I was wondering if we could try the opening. Thinking about, I guess that would be you have to find, can you help me out with this? Where the return is. Measure 53. It's not that it needs to take so much time per se, it needs to want to take time. And again, that's sort of going along with what Jonah's saying. There's an ease sometimes to this, which feels so good, but actually doesn't sound transcendent enough. If it just doesn't try just a little bit more to reach.
And then when you get, we're going to keep going in a minute here. So when you get to yum bum, that's also always pickup speeds 2 and 4, right? It's not so bum 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 bum. It's not so easy to get from these 8th note lifts to the next big beat. Every single one of them, yum ba yum ba yum ba yum ba. You see what I'm saying? There's a little bit of cool tension in there. You find that it creates a sort of a really wonderful thread that holds the thing together. Yum ba yum ba yum ba. And then when it's double timed, it's like it's just so exciting,
Did you want to move on?
No, I just thought if they're going to play that, maybe go on from there.
Yeah.
Do you want them to do it?
Well.
Yeah, right?
It's almost, it's like so gross. It's trying to reach drop.
Struggle more to the top, is that what
Yes.
you're doing?
Well, they
It's probably about work.
yeah, right. But the point is you need to have that at your fingertips, okay? So that if you're going so fast or you're moving in one direction, it doesn't, that kind of creativity can't really happen effectively. And so you need to want that. And you need to make space for that to happen. And that's, I think, really a lot of what this movement needs from you guys, because you really are playing it so beautifully and really convincingly, but it's like just a little bit going over our heads in terms of what we can experience in the moment with you. So you need to take us along a little bit more that way. Yeah.
Since we have 2 minutes left.